To attach Cinnamoroll's ear, we're going to look at the top of the head. We're going to determine this as the middle line, and from there we're going to go 2 stitches down. Next, we're going to take the darning needle attached to the ear and put it through these 2 stitches on the side of the head. We're going to pull the yarn through. Next, we're going to go into that first bottom stitch on the ear, and then we're going to go into the first stitch on the top of the ear, and then we're going to go into that middle stitch that's on the head between the stitches of the ear, and here we're going to come out through the stitch on the head that's at the bottom of the ear. And then we're going to go through the middle stitch on the bottom of the ear, then come out through the middle stitch on the top of the ear. And now we're going to go back into that middle stitch on the head, and then we're going to go into the side stitch at the beginning of the head. Then we're going to pull that through. Next, we're going to go to the first stitch on the bottom of the ear that's on the side right here. Once we go through that first stitch on the bottom, and then we're going to go through that first stitch that's on the top of the ear. And then we're going to go through that first stitch on the side on top of the head, and that goes to the bottom of the head. And now we're going to go back into the bottom stitch of the ear, the second bottom stitch of the ear, and then through the side of the top of the ear. And that should secure our ear. We're going to go back into the head to the other side, and then we're going to go through the ear, and we're going to go to the other side of the ear, and then back into the head, and then to the side. And now, since our tail is so short, we're just going to stuff it into the stitch. And now we're done with attaching Cinnamoroll's ear. And we're going to do the same procedure to attach the ear to the other side. To attach Cinnamoroll's tail, we're just going to place it on his back with the end at his bottom. Here I'm starting at the top of the tail, and then I'm going to just put the stitch into his body, and then back into his tail. And I'm just going to keep doing this, a stitch into the tail, and then a stitch back into the body, until I'm finished securing on the tail. You can sew it all the way around every stitch in the body, or just in a few of the main places. Here I'm just going to put a few stitches in the main places to secure the tail on. The tail also allows Cinnamoroll to sit without falling backwards, even with his big head. For Cinnamoroll's arm, it could be placed wherever you'd like it to be placed, depending on if you're going to have him do something or not. I'm going to place it towards the middle of the body because I'm going to have him hold a heart. Once I know where I want to place the arm, I'm going to go 1 stitch down from the neck and start sewing it onto the body. Once I have the first stitch from the arm to the body, I'm going to continue alternating the stitches from the arm to the body. I find that it looks the best is when you go through the inside of the stitch on the arm and through the outside back into the adjacent stitch onto the arm, and then through the stitch on the body. Once we have the arm where we want it to be placed, we can just finish it off by going through the body. Once the arm is sewn on, just follow the same steps to sew on the other arm. Sewing on Cinnamoroll's leg is just a few stitches. You can either have him sitting, or you can put it on the bottom and have him standing, but that takes a little bit more balance. So I'm just going to have him sitting. I'm going to place his leg right below the arm, and I'm just going to sew it right on. It's about 4 stitches. So I'm going to begin at the bottom of the leg to the bottom of his body. I find that it looks the best is if you go through the inside of one stitch on the leg, and then from the outside go into that adjacent stitch through the leg, and then just make a stitch through the body, and then continue doing the same thing from the leg into the body until the leg is fully sewn on. And once we have the leg sewn on, we're just going to go through one of the stitches and then go through the body. And once we have our leg sewn on, we're just going to follow the same steps to sew on the other leg. To make Cinnamoroll's face, I placed a piece of yarn down the middle. Then I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, and then on the 5th stitch and 9 stitches down, I added a stitch marker. It measures the same on the other side as well. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then on the 5th stitch, we have our stitch marker. And in this middle stitch, we're going to make our mouth. So on the eye, we'll be using this thin blue yarn. Going to go into the stitch on the bottom of our stitch marker and then exit in the stitch that's on the row number 9 where we entered our stitch marker. We'll be skipping one row because it takes like 2 rows for the eyes. And as we pull our yarn, we're going to stop before we pull it all the way through. There should be a little tail left. We're going to hold that tail down and then go back up into that bottom stitch and into the top stitch, and that will be the first stitch of our eye. We're going to make 10 of these stitches, so we're finished with our first, and don't worry about the tail here. Then we're going to go back in for our second, and this is why you need that bent tip. There's our second, third, fourth, and there's our 5th. And as you do this, you can make sure that you're alternating sides as well. And here's our 6th, 7th, 8th, and here on the 9th one, I like to keep the yarn on one side. So I'm going to hold this down and then pull the yarn through. And then it'll stay on one side. And then for the 10th, I'm going to hold it down on the other side. And now we're finished with Cinnamoroll's right eye. And then we're just going to cut the excess yarn and then tuck it inside. And then we're going to work on our left eye. Now that we've finished both eyes, we're going to work on the mouth. The top of the mouth begins on the same stitch as the bottom of the eye. We'll begin on these 2 middle stitches. We're going to enter the needle 1 row below the bottom of the eye, and we're going to exit in the hole right above. As we pull the yarn, we're not going to go all the way through, we're going to leave a little tail. We'll tuck the tail in later. Next, we're going to go in an angle. I'm going to turn the Cinnamoroll around so that you can see this better. So we're going to go into that next stitch that's in the angle and then exit in the next adjacent stitch like this. I'm going to tuck in the tail so that we don't get too confused. And as you can see, we just formed this angle stitch. So now we're going to go back into that angled stitch and exit right above this bottom stitch. So this right here. And this will form a straight line. And then we're going to go back into this stitch here where we just made the straight line and come out through the top of the mouth. So here we're going to enter in through that hole right by the straight stitch and then exit at the top of the mouth. And this stitch that goes downwards completes Cinnamoroll's mouth on one side. Now we're going to work on the other side. Since we're going to go into this stitch in an angle, I'm going to turn Cinnamoroll around so that the view is a little bit better and my hands aren't blocking it. Like we did on the other side, we're going to go into the stitch that's in the angle and then exit out of the adjacent stitch, forming the angle stitch. And then we're going to go back into this angle stitch and exit right above the straight stitch. So into the angle and out above the straight stitch. And this formed the little line that comes out from the top of his mouth. We're going to go back into the hole right by the straight stitch and exit at the top of the mouth. I'm going to turn the head again to get the right angle to go back into the mouth. I'm going to go into that hole by the straight stitch, and now I'm coming back out of the top of the mouth. And now we're finished with this side of Cinnamoroll's mouth. Then we're just going to cut the end and then tuck in that little tail. And as you can see, we have completed his whole mouth. And all we need are his little cheeks. For Cinnamoroll's cheeks, we're going to make 3 slanted lines. So like this, 1 slant, 2 slants, and 3 slants. We're going to start in the stitch right below his eye. So we're going to enter through this stitch and exit on that stitch right next to his eye. And here we're using a double threaded yarn, so we have a knot at the bottom here, and when we pull through, we don't want to pull it all the way through, but we just want the knot to go inside. So I'm just going to tuck the knot in so that it doesn't go all the way through. So we're going to go back into that hole that we started so we can make that angle. And then we're going to exit in that hole adjacent to the previous hole. And then this will form our angled stitch. And then we're going to go back into that hole that's right next to our first stitch and then exit out the next hole on the top. And then this will form our second angled stitch. Then we're going to go back into that next hole right by the second stitch on the bottom and then exit on that next top hole. And this will form our third stitch that's in an angle that forms his cheeks. And now we've just completed all 3 of our angled stitches for his cheeks. And now we're just going to tie a knot so that we could finish off his cheeks. So this knot is going to be really close to his face. And then we're just going to snip that off and then tuck in that knot. And there we go, we're all finished, and we're going to do this same thing on the other side. And like magic, we're done with our right hand side cheek, and we're finished with Cinnamoroll's little cute face. To make Cinnamoroll cuter, we can do something like adding a bow tie, or maybe have him hold a teddy bear, but here we made a little heart for him to hold, and we're going to sew that right onto his hands. And now we're finished with Cinnamoroll. Thank you so much for watching part 2 of this Cinnamoroll tutorial. Please hit that like button and subscribe. Have a great day.